There's a battle between Tommy Robinson and the government of the United Kingdom over what is true.
They've got Tommy in isolation. That's their strategy. Do you know how he's doing?
And he's deteriorating. That's another thing about being in jail I've learned from Tommy Robinson is you are at the mercy of these guards.
How would you describe the World Economic Forum?
When I go to the UK, I see what our future will be 5 years down the road if we don't change course. Let me tell you what's terrifying about that.
Hello, everybody. I'm sitting here in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada today, and my guest is Ezra Levant, and Ezra Levant is the perpetrator of Rebel News, which was an early adopter of social media technology on the news front, one of Canada's earliest adopters, and really one of the earliest adopters in the world, and he's been rabble-rousing for like a good, depends on how you count it, but 10 to 15 years, and we first came to each other's attention when I was participating in a free speech debacle at the University of Toronto just after my comments about Canada's infamous Bill C-16. My well-reasoned comments, I might add, came to wide public attention and caused a furor that never ended. And Rebel News backed me in that enterprise and helped publicize what was happening and supported my research financially for a year or so at the University of Toronto when the federal government decided that I wasn't worth supporting anymore, despite my stellar research background and unbroken history of previous funding. Anyways, I got a chance to talk to Ezra, and so we did a bit of walking down memory lane, talking about, well, the strange situation that obtains in Canada, not least with regard to the new likely Liberal leader, Mark Carney. We talked about the WEF and their machinations. We talked a fair bit about Tommy Robinson, a political prisoner in the UK. I did 2 interviews with him, and Ezra worked. Tommy Robinson was a journalist working for Rebel News for a good while. And we talked a lot about Tommy, who's in solitary confinement in a maximum security prison in the UK for a civil crime, which was distributing a film called Silenced, which is probably the most well-watched documentary that the UK has ever produced. So that gag order didn't work very well. We talked a fair bit about Australia, and we talked about the political situation in Canada and the UK. We talked about the trucker convoy and about the transformation of the news media from the corrupt government-funded legacy media in Canada, say, exemplified by the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, the CBC, and the rise of the new media, apart from wandering down memory lane. And so, I should mention something too. Even though Ezra was too shy to mention it during the podcast, which is not something that you'd normally say about Ezra Levant, too shy. He's got a new book coming out too, which is called Deal of the Century, the America First Plan for Canada's Oil Sands. And so, well, keep an eye out for that because there's a lot of oil in the oil sands and there's every reason to use it, despite the myriad of reasons that we're force-fed about not using it. And so, you know, Ezra's a battler for the Alberta economy and for Western energy independence and the utility of being grateful, let's say, for the fossil fuel industry that stops us from freezing to death in Winnipeg, for example, in the middle of the winter when it's minus 30 and everyone's warm. And so that's Deal of the Century, the America First Plan for Canada's Oil Sands. In any case, join me today for my discussion with Ezra Levant, head of Rebel News. They also, by the way, did a lot to publicize the truckers' convoy. Looking forward to it. So we have lots to talk about today. We can talk about our mutual friend, Tommy Robinson, and the whatever the hell is going on in the UK. We can talk about the WF because I know you've sent journalists there and been there yourself. We can talk about the stunningly dismal state of the political situation in Canada. And but I think I want to start with 2 other things. I want to remember how we met, and I want to talk to you about what's happened with Rebel News since then. So I want to hear how you think we met and what happened when we first began our association?
I saw a courageous professor, and those words don't go together very often, standing outside the University of Toronto, making the case for freedom of speech while people tried to shout him down. And in fact, Antifa types brought loudspeakers to blast white noise. And we had our cameras there and we said, who is this? And doesn't he know that he's going to get squashed? Doesn't he know to bend the knee? And this was almost 10 years ago. And
it was 2016 in the fall, yeah.
And we were citizen journalists just finding our legs.
Yeah.
Rebel News was only born in 2015.
Yeah. Lawrence Southern was there.
That's right. And that was before the great demonetization and cancellation of politically incorrect videos. It was the golden age for YouTubers. So things that were raw and interesting and real just zoomed on that channel.
Right.
That all came to an end in early 2017 because all this bubbling, frothing conversation helped put Donald Trump in the White House in 2016. And Silicon Valley woke up and said, we did that. And so you saw Facebook and YouTube and Google learn about community guidelines and throttling and boosting something that has really been going on to this day.
Well, and it's still, it's going on, except it's increasingly invisible.
Yeah.
We have no idea how these giant corporations, Google in particular, manipulate behind the scenes to ensure that the right slant is brought to bear not only on the content, but on the viewership and the dissemination, which is even YouTube, for example. Took us like about 6 months to figure this out. My YouTube channel, this was a couple of years ago, maybe even last year, our numbers were slipping, but my subscriber rate was continuing to go up and at a good rate. Like I accrue about 100,000 subscribers a month, which is quite a few. And we found that some flunky, maybe, who knows why or on whose orders, scrubbed the name Peterson from the autofill in the search bar. So if you typed in P-E-T, it didn't fill. It didn't fill for Michaela, my daughter, because she has a podcast, but for any Petersons, but it definitely didn't fill for me. And so that was a hard thing to ferret out, It was a subtle manipulation of the distribution of the videos, because a lot of the way that people find new videos is by autofill, right? So that's just one example among many.
A Google insider a few years back showed me some internal chats that they had in their company. There were more people at Google watching and talking and commenting and criticizing Rebel News than who worked for Rebel News. And we're a fraction of your size. So anything to touch your discoverability would be done. I wouldn't say a junior flunky. You're being too kind. And we know that this goes straight to the top. Mark Zuckerberg pretty much confessed to that a few weeks ago when he said he was going to stop doing that. We know from some lawsuits in the U.S., especially during the pandemic, from the White House to the FBI to the CIA, there was so many different government organizations, including to do with health, that were plugged right in to the back end of social media, trying to throttle people, even like RFK Jr.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely.
And if you said anything that was contrarian about the pandemic, even things that are now accepted, like the likelihood that it came from the Wuhan Virology Center or Research Center, you would be demonetized, so you wouldn't be able to sell ads. You would be throttled in various ways. You would be suspended. It happened to us. We were growing at 8% per month. Not quite the stats that you described, but back in 2015, 2016, we were the largest YouTube news service in Canada, more than Global News, more than CTV. Those are massive billion-dollar companies. We were bigger. And then, bam, in January 2017, we were cut by 85%. And then they later just took it all down to zero. We still have about 1.7 million YouTube subscribers, and I love them, and we'll always give them content. But we're not allowed to put a single ad towards them or get what's called a super chat. And we love Rumble, which is a free speech alternative. But really, Elon Musk has not only saved free speech, but I think through that saved America.
How are you guys doing on X?
Well, I mean, I love it. It doesn't make a lot of money for us.
Yeah.
But we have that kind of growth and engagement that we used to have back in the day at YouTube. And I hope Rumble continues to grow. Those guys have free speech on their mind, and they've got some big support. They're doing interesting deals, not just with social media, but cloud services. And I don't know, there's a lot of ways that censorship works. But I think the government has to get involved with rooting. Here's an example. Elon Musk and his Doge, they're going through and finding all these cases where the government has been paying regime journalists.
Well, I think in Canada, if I've got this right, maybe this is misinformation. So for everybody watching and listening, there's your misinformation warning for the day. I came across information from a variety of sources suggesting that about 25% of the salary of the typical legacy media journalist in Canada is essentially subsidized by the government.
I think it's actually closer to 30, and that's just through one particular program. And 99% of Canadian journalists are on that program. The CBC itself, the state broadcaster, is larger than all other media combined, all other news media combined.
Yeah, but Ezra, they do get hundreds of views on their YouTube postings. Hundreds.
But that's the paying for a certain message. What is fascinating and terrifying is to see how U.S. government and now Canadian government money and UK funds so-called fact checkers. For example, NewsGuard.
Yeah, fact checkers.
I don't know if you ever heard of NewsGuard. The huge contracts with the U.S. Air Force for some reason. And they review any website and give it a rating. And that rating is plugged into browsers. And it basically says this is safe and this is dangerous. And it's purely political. I mean, they rate us every year. It's a BS exercise. They ask us questions about Trump. They ask us questions about transgenderism. And they ask us questions about vaccines. You can see they're pushing a very particular message track. And they censor us for our opinions, not our facts. These things are all funded by the government.
Yeah, well, the thing is, if it was an easy thing to separate out opinion from fact, the world would be a much less complex place. You know, today's fact is tomorrow's opinion, and today's opinion is tomorrow's fact. And partly we're exchanging information all the time to distinguish between the two, but it's not like it's easy a priori. And so many preposterous things have turned out to be true. You know, I think the thing that shocked me most, two things that I discovered in the last 10 years, I suppose, were kind of at the top of the list of shocking realities. And one was that the public education system in North America and in Europe and in Japan, for that matter, was literally created by fascist industrialists in the late 1800s to make unthinking workers available for use in factories. They based the public education system on the Prussian military model, and the Prussians had decided they were going to train rural people to be soldiers. And the last thing they wanted them to do was think. And so that's like, I just don't even know what to do with a piece of information like that, but nothing's changed in 100. Well, that's why it's rows of desks and there's factory bells. And, you know, there was some reason for it. Rural people were pouring into the cities. Their kids were very likely to work in factories. You know, they had to learn to work by the bell, but the insistence that the products be unthinking, you know, because otherwise they wouldn't be suitable factory workers. First of all, that's a stupid theory because you actually want your factory workers to think so they can see what's wrong on the line and help you work to continuously improve your industrial processes. The Japanese figured that out. So it was a stupid theory to begin with, but it's also dehumanizing. And, you know, that's still the ethos of the public school system. So that's appalling. And then the next bit of, you know, impossible conspiratorial reality that I uncovered was, not that I uncovered it, you know, globally, I don't mean that, but for my own edification, was that the food pyramid was formulated by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and it was a marketing ploy. And they knew that it was going to cause an epidemic of obesity and diabetes because their own experts told them that. It's like, so.
And those are, I don't even think those are particularly acute crises. Those are sort of long-standing problems that it's not, oh my God, we've got to snuff this idea out before this election, like the Hunter Biden laptop story.
That's a dreadful story.
So what you're talking about are big swaths of ideas.
Right. And then there's the crisis ideas like the ones you just described.
Which are so throttled around elections.
The Hunter Biden laptop story, that's another one too. I talked to Miranda Devine. She broke that story for the New York Post. I've had her on as a guest twice. And that's another story that's just completely unbelievable. I mean, Hunter Biden dropped 3 laptops off. Not 1, 3. Now, the first question you might ask yourself is, how do you water soak 3 laptops? Right? 1, okay, you dropped it in the pool during your cocaine-fueled misery binge. But 3? And he did that a week before his father announced his run for presidency. And like a Freudian would sniff around that for about 15 years, and rightly so. And then there was a lot of damning material on there, which you think he might have thought about a little bit, unless he was out for revenge, let's say. And then, well, then the story broke, and then just a calamitous tsunami of absolute lies. They knocked the New York Post off of Twitter, and that's the oldest standing newspaper in North America. Right?
Alexander Hamilton, I think.
Yeah, it's a bit tabloidy, and, you know, and nonetheless, it does some very good work, and certainly the work it did on the Hunter Biden laptop story was good. And then they called it Russian disinformation, and this is like weeks before the election. I truly believe that that was enough to throw the election. Now, it turned out maybe that it was worse for the progressives that Trump had 4 years to think in what would you call exile, you know, because here he's back and he's been thinking for quite a while. But, and then those intelligence agents signed that document that said it had all the earmarks of a Russian disinformation.
It's such a funny phrase.
That's for sure. You know how conniving and miserable and wretched and deceitful and traitorous you have to be to come up with a line like that? Yeah. It's like, well, we have to convince the American people that this is a hoax, but we know it isn't a hoax, so we have to walk the line very carefully. So if it comes back to bite us in the ass, we can say, well, it would just, all we said was that it had the hallmarks of a Russian disinformation campaign, not that it actually was one. Hint, hint, wink, wink, you know? And Zuckerberg, you know, I have some sympathy for Zuckerberg, actually. I've talked to him, and maybe I'm naive, and it's certainly possible, because I tend to give people the benefit of the doubt. But, you know, 10 years ago, if the White House came knocking at your door and said, you're running a very complex operation here, we have reason to believe that it has been compromised, we'd like you to aid us in our investigations. You know, you can think you would have been like free speech advocate number 1 and said no, but most people will back off their free speech with a lot less pressure than that. That's for sure. And Zuckerberg definitely made mistakes. And you could say that his admission of guilt, you know, in the Trump era is self-serving. And I suppose you could, you know, that's something to consider, but you have to be pretty damn sure of yourself to think you would have done better. I'm not trying to excuse it or what happened on Twitter, which was way worse. I mean, hello, everybody. I want to tell you about Peterson Academy. So as I watched the universities deteriorate and become inexcusably ideologically rigid over the years, I started thinking about what might be done to address that. We have the technology at hand now to film the best lectures on any given topic at every university around the world, and to bring the results of that filming and distribution to a wide audience at a very low cost. And we also have the ability to do that with the best possible production quality. And so I started working with my daughter and her team on Peterson Academy a number of years ago, and we launched in August. We have about 40 courses on our platform now. We're producing for a month, and I think I can say without hesitation that they're the best courses that you can obtain on topics associated with higher education anywhere. And they're beautifully filmed and produced. There's a very inviting and welcoming social media element to Peterson Academy, and it's all available at an eminently reasonable price. We set out to produce the best education platform in the world, and I think we managed that. Go to Peterson Academy and gain access to the kind of education that was once reserved at the best institutions for the most elite and privileged of students, and change your life in consequence.
Well, we only know what happened to Twitter because Elon Musk himself revealed it. He sort of opened up his own kimono to show the world. Yep. I've got to think it was the same at YouTube, Google, Facebook, Instagram. They just haven't been as forthcoming. Elon Musk is very unusual that way.
Yeah.
And what I find...
and there is misinformation and disinformation campaigns. It's not like TikTok isn't run by the Chinese communists, and it's warped a whole generation of young women because that's where they get all their information. Yeah. And 18 to 35-year-old young women in the United States have political views that are way out of alignment with everyone else's, hyper progressive and liberal. And there's absolutely no doubt that the Chinese communists are fomenting discord using TikTok. Obviously, clearly, and in a documented way.
And they're tracking too, because today's 15-year-old in 5 years will be 20, and maybe he'll be a soldier then, and maybe at 25, maybe he'll be think of if you're tracking someone and all their conversations and all their networks and all their friends, and if everything they say is being recorded from their gestures to, and if it's all being backed up in big data in Beijing. You're talking to a kid today, but in 20 years from now, you've got some dirt on someone.
Yeah.
And I mean, TikTok is so addictive. Elon Musk said the algorithm, he felt it pulling on his mind. He had to shut it down. It's an amazing algorithm. It knows what you like almost more than you do. And that's what
probably
makes it so...
more, certainly explicitly more than you do. Definitely.
And the thing is...
people won't admit to what they like.
And not just that. Maybe you forgot what you said in that phone call 5 years ago. How can it forget? It never forgets anything in some ways. Yeah. And there is some reason to be terrified about it. But I think Donald Trump has decided if there's going to be AI, let it be in America rather than in China.
Well, that's Musk's take on it too, is that, this is a dreadful war, this AI war, because these AI systems use reinforcement learning, and that's how biological systems learn. They're very lifelike, very, very lifelike, and their intelligence is limited only by their database and the amount of power at the moment that's available. Computational ability, power, and the database, and those are just growing like mad. And so, it's clearly the case that these systems, well, in some ways, without AI, advertisers, the successful ones, knew more about your preferences than you did. But with AI, well, that's a whole different ballgame, especially when they're starting to do things like analyze your eye movements, because eye movements are very, very indicative of attentional focus, right? They're almost a perfect window into the soul, which is why we look at each other's eyes when we talk, right? So these cameras on your phones can track your eyes with no problem. Well, and then the AI systems will know more about what motivates each of us and all of us than we will. They probably already do. So, So Musk's take on that is, well, better him than the Chinese. If it has to be someone, and it seems like it has to be, because what are you going to stop AI? Good luck. There's no stopping it. Yeah. There's not even hypothetically a way to stop it, because you can't even define it really. Like, what are you going to do? Make the mathematics illegal? That's all statistics, by the way. So that's gone. No, that's not going to happen. Let's go back to 2016.
Sure.
Okay. So that was a shock to me that day. That was a free speech protest. Now, that was advertised as mine, but it wasn't. I was just invited to speak by a bunch of students, and I'd never been involved like anything like that in campus. I wasn't a controversial figure politically by any stretch of the imagination, and these bloody radicals showed up. Well, first of all, the trans mob, so they were fun, and these serious radical types, and they brought these white noise blasters to drown me out. And I can't remember if I unplugged one or if there was a rough guy there who unplugged it. And then there was a bit of a skirmish around that. It's like, because I don't know, it's a tricky business. Do I have the right to speak in public? Does someone have a right to drown me out with white noise generator? Well, it's not exactly obvious whose right triumphs in that particular instance. And
it felt like a struggle session in a way.
Oh, it was
like
a struggle
Maoist,
session. Bloody Maoists,
They were trying to put the hat on you and make you confess.
Definitely. Yeah,
and
that didn't go so well.
I mean, if I recall, your grants, you always had, and those were seized.
Yeah, it wasn't the university that did that.
That was the federal government, wasn't it? Social sciences.
So one of your requirements as a professor essentially is to generate enough grant funding, usually from federal agencies, it's probably not a good idea, by the way, to keep your lab running to fund your graduate students. And there's small grants in Canada, but they're one thing I would say in favor of the Canadian granting system is it doesn't take all your time to write the grants like it does in the United States. Anyways, not only does that fund your graduate students some travel and some research costs, there's nothing in it that's personal, but it also funds the university to some degree because they take overhead costs. And I always got a grant. I had an
until
then.
Until.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that wasn't accidental. I mean, it wasn't like I was a good researcher. I had an excellent research dossier. And I don't know if I'm the most cited clinical psychologist in Canada, but I've got to be in the top 10. So still, by the way, so there was absolutely no reason for them to pull my funding, but they did. That's right. And then you did a fundraising campaign, right? Right.
We did, yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? This is one of those cases where the people were on one side and the institutions were another. That's where crowdfunding works sometimes.
Yeah, right.
Where it's sort of an 80-20 kind of thing. I mean, transgenderism in sports is another example of that. All the institutions are on one side and the people are on the other. Trump.
Like pipelines in Canada.
I think so.
It's 80-20, by the way.
And I think people, I don't think a lot of grassroots people think about government grants for scholarship in academia, but they could see that you were being punished for it in a way that was designed to hurt you. So severely normal people said, well, we did crowdfund sort of a replacement for that. And
that's where I met Lauren too that day. She was quite the creature. She wasn't very old then, eh? She was only about 18.
Very young.
But she's had a rough time. Man, she's been through the mill, that girl.
Rebel News has met some colorful characters over the years.
That's for sure.
You're one of them.
That's for sure. Yeah.
I mean, I think you
guys have roused a lot of rabble.
But I think that's healthier than the alternative, which is a conformity. In these controversial days, air it out, hear it out, let the both sides clash. And that's what YouTube was like. That's what we got rolling with what we called citizen journalism. Everyone calls it that now.
Yeah, you were early adopters of that.
Yeah, I used to be with a real TV station called Sun News Network. There were 200 folks. It had real studios across the country. My studio in Toronto was $1 million studio with 5 people working in the control room. It was a real operation. And a billionaire named Pierre-Carl Pelleteau put a ton of dough into it. But it was sort of euthanized by Canada's TV regulator, the CRTC.
How?
Well, in the end, the TV network had to do deals with different cable companies. Will you carry it? What channel will you carry it on? Will you, how much will you charge customers for it? How much will you pass on to Rebel News? And all of these things are regulated. And so the regulator basically euthanized it and said, we're going to give you a few, like
regulators turn into censors at the drop of a hat. It gets happened in the universities. So,
and in the UK, they're Ofcom. They have
right.
Especially with media, that's how you can kill it.
Yeah.
And they killed Sun News. And I resolved that I would never put myself in a position where a government regulator could do that to us again. So we went all internet. We didn't try and do anything in a real TV or real radio.
Right.
But in the last couple of years.
What was your, okay, you talked about some of your motivation for doing that on the bureaucrat side, let's say. How do you think it was that you saw that opportunity existed on YouTube? And I started putting my lectures on YouTube, I think in 2012 or 2013. It was really an experiment, right? What the hell is this video on demand? It was all cute cat videos at that point, right? It looked like nothing. That was before Google bought it. But I thought, well, on-demand video, permanent. That's a revolution, man. That's a revolution. So what were you thinking about in relationship? Was it specifically YouTube that you gravitated towards first?
Well, yes, because I had a YouTube experience that I'm going to say saved my life maybe 5 years or almost 10 years earlier. Let me tell you the story really quick. I was the publisher of a print magazine called the Western Standard. You know, we would print it on paper and mail it out every 2 weeks. It's even hard to imagine such a thing existed now. And this was when the Danish cartoons of the Muslim prophet Muhammad caused such a fuss overseas. I think that was late 2005.
Yeah, right.
And
you're not supposed to print an image of Muhammad.
That's right.
Well, at least there's some interpretations of Islam that make that claim.
Right.
And the noisy ones definitely make that claim.
Success in business isn't just about offering an amazing product or service, though that's certainly essential. What truly sets thriving companies apart is having powerful, reliable tools working behind the scenes to streamline every aspect of the selling process. These are the systems that turn the complex challenge of reaching customers and processing sales into something that feels effortless and natural. That's exactly where Shopify enters the picture, transforming the way businesses operate in the digital age. Nobody does selling better than Shopify. They're home to the #1 checkout on the planet. And here's the game changer. With Shop Pay, they're boosting conversions up to 50%. That means fewer abandoned carts and more sales going to your bottom line. In today's world, your business needs to be everywhere your customers are, whether that's scrolling through social media, shopping online, or walking into a physical store. Shopify powers it all, seamlessly connecting your business across the web, your store, customer feeds, and everywhere in between. And here's the truth. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Join over 2 million entrepreneurs who have already discovered the power of unified commerce with Shopify's all-in-one platform. Upgrade your business to the same checkout we use with Shopify. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/JBP, all lowercase. Head to shopify.com/JBP to upgrade your selling today. That's shopify.com/JBP.
So there were riots around the world, over 200 people killed.
Yeah.
And every mainstream media outlet panicked and refused to show it. The Wall Street Journal, CNN, New York Times. And so that actually added menace to it. Wow, they'll print anything. They won't show what these cartoons are like. They must be awful. No, in fact, they were pretty banal, nothing more controversial than what you'd see on the political cartoons in any major newspaper on any subject. So we had this little magazine called the Western Standard, 40,000 subscribers based in Western Canada. And we were fortnightly, so we're not hot on the news. So I thought, okay, by the time we published, I thought, everyone else will have shown the cartoons. So we're not going to go with, ta-da, here's what they are. We'll be more analytical. And we made the point you just did, not all Muslims hold, that you can't depict Muhammad. We did sort of a think piece kind of thing. The cartoon was not on the cover. It was tucked inside. But by the time this came off the printing presses, it was clear we were the only people in the country that were going to do this.
Almost the only people in the world.
Very few did it.
Very few, man. There were like 3 news outlets, I think 3 or 4. You were one of them.
And our phones rang off the hook. A lot of people who called at the time were Muslim, I would say, exiles who said, I didn't come to Canada to have Sharia law follow me across the world. I found that very encouraging. And mostly people just appreciated the fact that we let them decide. And we didn't show the cartoons saying we agree with them. It was more like a prosecutor puts evidence to a jury.
It's news. It was obviously news.
Exactly. And if you're in the radio business, you paint a picture with your words, but when you have a printing press, you show it. So we showed it, and it was wonderful. But then the Alberta Human Rights Commission, which is a government agency.
Another commission, by the way, that does nothing like what its name says it does.
Exactly. Because there's no such thing as the right not to be offended. That's a counterfeit human right. That's actually you're torturing the language. That's a power to silence.
Well, that's exactly that right. My right to not be offended by you. In fact, my right to control your tongue.
We have the right to be offended. And just stop and think about that for a minute. In some parts of the world, you're not allowed to be offended by things. You're not allowed to express your outrage at things. You have to suck it up. In Canada, we have the right to be offended, not the right not to be offended. So a radical imam.
Well, it was illegal in the Soviet Union to complain about your own pain.
Well, and that's the thing. The answer is, where does hatred come from? Because I was charged, I still to this day remember the wording of the law under which I was charged by the Alberta Human Rights Commission. And it is against the law to publish anything, quote, likely to expose a person to hatred or contempt.
Have you read Bill C-63?
Very closely.
Oh my God! And you think Carney will pass that when he gets coronated?
He hasn't indicated that he won't. Let me tell you what's terrifying about that. Likely to. So that's a future crime.
Right.
So how do you defend against a future crime? Now, there are some future crimes in our criminal code. Uttering a death threat, I suppose, is a future crime. Attempted something. But likely to what? Punch someone? That's very measurable. No, likely to expose a person to hatred or contempt. So you're going to do something that's likely to cause him to have hard feelings about him. And how do you measure that? And what's likely to? And by the way,
they're playing with that in the UK in a big way.
And truth is not a defense. What's truth got to do with it? You caused him to have hard feelings about him.
That's the truth. That's the new definition of truth, fundamentally.
So,
Yeah. You know, that was a canary in the coal mine. You fought that for how long?
I was pursued for 900 days.
Yeah.
And the apex of that was we managed to convince the interrogator for the Alberta Human Rights Commission to allow us to make a record of my interrogation. Now, we didn't say radio, so it was in my lawyer's office. It was on a Friday afternoon. And we managed to convince the interrogator to come to us. So we had set up, it was conspicuous, it wasn't hidden. We had set up a camera.
Yeah.
This was before smartphones. I had never used a camera before. And we set it up in the room. So the interrogator comes in, she looks at the camera. You can see she's sort of hesitating for a second, but it's Friday afternoon and we had been negotiating this meeting for months. So she just sits down and she proceeds to grill me.
Yeah, yeah.
And what do you think her first question was? It was, why did you publish the cartoons? Now, the thing is, if anyone else had asked me that question, I probably did 100 media interviews. I would try and be the most reasonable version of me I could be. I would try and explain it. Separation of mosque and state. It's the central artifact in a news story. We have to talk this out. I would try and be as reasonable as possible. I talked to a lot of Muslim folks and I tried to say, no, please understand why I was trying to appeal to their reason. But when the government asks you the same question, you can't answer in the same way. Because the government is not asking out of curiosity or out of intellectual growth.
Right.
They're asking because something turns on it.
Right.
Punishment turns on it. If you don't appease them and say the right answer, you will be punished.
Yep.
And so you can't answer the same way. And so I remember what I said. I said, because it's my bloody right to do so. And I'm not trying to convince you and wiggle through. I want my maximum freedom. And I recorded this on this video camera, and I went home that day, and I managed somehow to edit that video. I'd never done it in my life, and I set up a YouTube account. I'd never done that in my life. This was when YouTube was pretty new. There was no social media back then. There was no Facebook, no Twitter, or anything like that. And I uploaded the video of my interrogation because I knew no one would believe me if I said a magazine publisher was just grilled for 1 hour about my political and religious views.
Yep.
For publishing.
That was a crucial case. Yep.
And people, that went viral.
Right. Before viral was
That's
a thing,
right.
really.
Hundreds of thousands.
What year was that?
I think it was 2008.
Oh, yeah, that's really early.
And
that's really early.
And
right, so that clued you into the power of that media.
The asymmetry of it. The asymmetry. There were more than a dozen bureaucrats and lawyers for the Alberta Human Rights Commission coming for me. And the complainant, this radical imam, didn't have to pay a cent.
Yeah.
And his complaint was so laughable, he cited as legal basis, he was citing passages from the Quran. He said he personally was a descendant of Muhammad and I had offended him. And I thought, oh, for sure this is going to be thrown out. No, it was not. A dozen people. I mean, human rights is the middle name of the Alberta Human Rights Commission. They were anything but. I would have been flattened.
They're anything but. Yeah.
I would have been flattened. But the internet saved me. That blogging was a thing back then. And PayPal was new. So that's how I funded my lawyer. The Western Standard magazine came to an end, as all magazines sort of did around then. So I didn't have the dough to fight this.
Do you know what it cost you?
You know what? It was close to $100,000.
Yeah, and that's in 2008. That's like $10 million now.
It was fascinating to deal with them. They are so used to making deals with rational business people who say, there's no way I'm going to win here.
Yeah.
Just pay it out and get it over. They offered me, they said, if you pay that imam, I think it was like $8,000, and give him a page in the magazine to write whatever he wants, we'll let you go. And they assumed I would take it. And any rational decision maker would have taken that deal. Instead of fighting, you're not going to win. Look at the law.
Depends on what you mean by win.
Well, that's right. And we can talk a little bit more about my friend Tommy Robinson and how, in a way, he is irrational too, if the idea is to save yourself.
Yeah.
Like he was in court in the UK. I sat there and I watched the judge say to him, will you take down that video? This was shortly after you interviewed him.
Yeah.
He put up a video on Twitter. A judge said, don't do it. Don't do it. He did it.
Yeah.
He was brought before the judge. I'm switching gears now.
Yeah.
And and he was in the dock, and the judge said, "I'm going to give you the maximum sentence." The video had been seen 55 million times.
Yeah.
The lodge said, "You take it down now. I'm going to lop months."
Silenced?
That's right. And Tommy wouldn't bend the knee.
Yeah. Well, he was out of the country too, and he went back for his trial.
He went back. He was.
I know.
In Spain.
We talked about that, and well, we discussed the pros and cons of him staying away or going back to face the music, and Socrates, when he was sentenced to death by the Athenians, they thought he'd run. Like they told him, "We're going to try you 6 months from now." Hint, hint, wink, wink.
Yeah.
Why don't you get out of town, you troublesome old goat?
Yeah.
Because otherwise, the axe is going to fall. And he went out and had a little discussion with his conscience, and it said, "Don't run."
Yeah. Well, I visited Tommy in Spain and came back with him on the flight because we thought he would be arrested the minute he landed. They waited a few days and they picked him up strategically so he could not attend a rally.
Oh, yeah.
And let me talk about that moment just for 1 second. Tommy has flaws, but he also has within him a gleaming diamond that is rare. And let me tell you what that is. The video had been seen 55 million times. The judge was saying, if you take it down now, you'll go home to your family months earlier. And I'll confess, I said to Tommy, I said, "Look, brother, you've had the most watched documentary film ever produced in the UK. That's the biggest win of all time. Take it down and don't be away from your family."
Yeah.
And I said that to him as a friend. I said, "You have the biggest win you can. 55 million views." He said, "No." Now it has over 150 million views. And the world is talking about it, including Elon Musk himself, who retweeted it. And see, the law isn't used to dealing with people who are not rationalizing, sort of maximizing the optimal outcome for reducing pain.
No, the optimal outcome for reducing immediate pain.
Right.
That's a big difference,
You're right.
man.
So they thought I was going to take the deal back in 2008 to let this imam have a page in the magazine rather than to fight a six-figure fight for 3 years.
Yeah.
And with Tommy, they thought he would bend the knee and take that thing down. Instead, he said, "No, I'll hold fast."
Yeah.
And so he's still in the clink. By the way, they have him in solitary confinement.
Yeah.
They cleared out the whole segregation block. He's the only prisoner in there. He's in his cell 21 hours a day. He's allowed out to have a shower. He's allowed out to ride a stationary bike and to sort of a homemade gym. The rest of the time, he is in isolation. It's been over 100 days.
Right now, they've also forbade anyone with a social media following to visit him, which is a weird, what does that mean, a social media following?
I just got that
3 people? 1,000 people?
Everyone has a social media following.
Yeah, right.
And by the way,
so it means whatever the hell they want.
A lot of his friends happen to be in them. I was scheduled to go and visit him on February 16th.
Yeah.
And I just got a letter from the prison governor saying, "We understand you have a social media presence and we're not going to let you in." The trouble with that is these visitors, I'm interested to hear how he's doing.
Yeah. Do you know how he's doing?
Well, I hear from his family and and he's deteriorating.
Well, yeah, no doubt.
You cannot it is a form of mental torture. Solitary confinement is how you punish a prisoner who's already in prison.
You can punish a psychopath with solitary confinement. That's how punishing it is. You can take the most antisocial person in the world and put him in solitary, and he's social enough so that that's a punishment, right? A serious punishment.
But it's
now
limited.
They have him in a maximum security prison too.
There
right?
are murderers in that prison.
Yeah.
I visited him once before they brought in this no visitors rule.
Yeah.
And it was quite something to get through this labyrinth of doors. And I met with him early, and he was in high enough spirits in the first month. Now he's in his 4th month there.
Yeah, he's got 5 more?
That's right. And he's falling apart.
Jesus.
Here's the problem with banning visitors.
Yeah, he doesn't know what's going on, eh?
Not just that. The visitors want to visit for their own sake. I want to talk to him about certain things. I want to report back certain things on his health. But from his point of view, he needs the visitors to stay sane. Yeah,
definitely.
And he has certain visiting slots. His family cannot fill them all. His family is living a life. His kids are in school. And so I was in court when the judge meted out the sentence. The judge gave him the maximum sentence allowed by law. To be served in solitary, no such thing. Right. The killer, the Southport murderer.
Well, now, my understanding is that he requested solitary.
No, untrue.
Okay, so walk me through. Okay, so what I garnered or gleaned was that because the prison was so dangerous and was full of the sort of people, let's say, that might not be all that happy about Mr. Robinson, like the last prison he was in where he got beat up very badly, that he needed protection. But you're telling me that's not true.
In fact, he always says, put me in the ward, put me in the wing, and I'll fend for myself, and it's on you, prison. The prison don't know what to do with them. Because you're correct to say in the UK,
because it's a civil offense, right?
That's right. He's a civil prisoner. He didn't even, it wasn't a crime what he did. In the United States, you have different kinds of gangs in prison. There's the white gangs, the black gangs, the Latino gangs. You go to a gang for protection. In the UK, by far the dominant gangs are the Muslim gangs.
Right.
In fact, you convert to join.
Uh-huh.
And the thing is, Tommy Robinson is a skeptic and a critic of Islam. And anyone who would put a knife into him would be a hero in the community forever.
Yeah, right.
And so there are some ways to imprison such a man, especially if he's a civil prisoner. It's not a crime that he's in jail for. He put a video up. And let's get back to fact checkers for 1 second. Let me say this. The judge said, what you're going to put online is not admissible in court. I reject it as the truth because it was not admissible in court under these rules of civil procedure. Okay, fair enough, Judge. But that doesn't mean it's not true, and that doesn't mean it's not useful, and we don't all have to seek truth through a particular legal system where lawyers and judges determine what you're allowed to see and what you're not allowed to see. So what's happening is there's a battle between Tommy Robinson and the government of the United Kingdom over what is true. Mm-hmm. And a judge says, in my courtroom, where Tommy did not have a lawyer, where he was sort of doing homemade law, you were not allowed to bring certain evidence into the trial. And so you're not allowed to put him in a different forum where you're more adept, a social media video. How is that anything other than a brutal fact check? And when Tommy Robinson didn't accept it, solitary confinement, he'll serve 9 months in solitary. I don't know anyone other than Julian Assange who's done that. And there really is a two-tier.
Where's the prison?
It's called Wood Hill. It's in a town called Milton Keynes. It's about a 90-minute drive from Heathrow Airport. And I'm still hoping to go in. I wrote back to the prison governor just yesterday saying, look, I'll sign an NDA, which is obscene.
Right.
And this prison governor, who is she to say I can't say what Tommy said and I can't say what I see? But I want to actually put eyes on him.
Especially outside the UK.
It's just unheard of.
Yeah.
But I want to put eyes on him. I want to see how he's doing.
No, absolutely.
And they are delaying and delaying it. You know what? They would like him to die in prison. And
that would be a mistake.
I think so. And what I've learned, my advice to him 3 months ago was take the video down and don't go to jail for so long. Declare victory. But his victory is magnified much more and so they don't know how to deal with him. I want to tell you one more Tommy story, and I know I talk about him a lot, but I think I go to the UK. I know you do too, and I think we love it for similar reasons. It's the source of our language and our culture and our history, the source of our freedoms,
English common law.
You know, I'm in love with the place.
Yep, me too.
And
absolutely.
I can't get enough. But it's also, my trips there, I call them a dystopian time machine. When I go to the UK, I see what our future will be 5 years down the road if we don't change course on matters like mass immigration that is not culturally
net
fit.
Zero.
Yeah, they're what they call ULEZ, ultra low emission zones, and the cameras.
Which means peasants don't get cars. But that's what ULEZ means. It doesn't mean you have cleaner air, folks. It means you can stay in your goddamn house and freeze to death in the dark.
What does the future hold for business? Ask 9 experts, you'll get 10 different answers. Bull market, bear market, inflation up, inflation down. Can someone please invent a crystal ball? Well, until then, over 41,000 businesses have future-proofed their operations with NetSuite by Oracle, the #1 cloud ERP, bringing accounting, financial management, inventory, and HR into one fluid platform. With one unified business management suite, there's one source of truth giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. Think about it. With real-time insight and forecasting, you're essentially peering into the future with actionable data. When you're closing your books in days instead of weeks, you're spending less time looking backward and more time focused on what's next. For any business owner looking to streamline their operations, NetSuite is the solution I'd recommend. Whether your company's earning millions or even hundreds of millions, NetSuite helps you respond to immediate challenges and seize your biggest opportunities. Speaking of opportunity, download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning at netsuite.com/JBP. This guide is free to you at netsuite.com/JBP. Again, that's netsuite.com/JBP.
But you can also see what the dissidents are like. Tommy Robinson being one dissident. They had things there, people who call themselves blade runners, who go out with metal cutting saws, who take down those surveillance cameras in less than a minute. But we
don't approve of the blade runners.
We absolutely don't.
That's right. Just so everyone knows, we certainly don't approve of the blade runners.
It's amazing to see. I mean, remember what Orwell said. If there's any hope, it's with the proles.
Yeah, right.
Because
that's what left-wingers used to believe, back when they were on the left. Instead of wherever the hell they are now, in the pockets of the WEF.
Tommy used to work for Rebel News back in the day. I mentioned we had some colorful characters. You name it. They passed the doors of Rebel News.
You and Menzies, too.
He's still with us. He's the best.
Yeah. How many times has he been arrested now?
5 times last year alone.
In Canada. For being a journalist. How many times have you been arrested?
Just once.
Just once. You have to work on that.
But I was arrested. I was on the street near my neighborhood. I live in a fairly Jewish...
This is in Toronto.
In Toronto. And
Jewish neighborhood in Toronto. That's fun.
Yeah. And
whoever thought we'd say that in Canada?
Let me tell you what went down there, because it bothers me to this day. Every week, some Jews would wave Israeli and Canadian flags for the hostages who were being held by Hamas. In a Jewish neighborhood, on a Jewish street corner. It was an attempt to be positive. And they've been doing that for more than a year. A few months ago, Hamas supporters were driving all the way in from far away every Sunday on the opposite side of the street to have a counter demonstration with anti-Semitic signs, loudspeakers shouting insane, from the river to the sea, swastikas. And then one day, they had someone reenact Yahya Sinwar's final moments. He was the head of Hamas, who was found in a chair. So they brought this bloody chair and this guy with
How was he killed?
He was killed, I don't know what finally did him in, but there was a drone photograph of drone video of his final moments.
I see.
So they were reenacting, it would be like reenacting a Hitler's bunker or something. And I just thought, this is crazy. And there were so many cops there, and I'm not particularly a fan of hate speech laws.
Yeah, right.
But they're on the books.
Yeah, no, they're appalling.
And I don't know what more you need. So I went there just to take a picture. I didn't go there to counter protest. This is in my neighborhood. I saw it on social media.
Had you been at those sorts of protests before?
I had been to record, because it's just astonishing. But that day, I was at home. I had no plans to go, because it's every single weekend. But I thought, are they really reenacting this Hamas moment? So I went there and I said to the cops, I got to take a picture of that. And the first cop sort of escorted me in. And when the Hamas types objected, they sort of pushed me out, which I didn't like.
Objected on what grounds?
That I'm Jewish.
You can't take a picture of their protest? Why the hell are they protesting?
That's exactly.
You can't take a picture of it. Protest at home.
I was escorted away. I'm on the public sidewalk in my neighborhood. There's a wall of 30 cops between me and the Hamas types. And I'm sort of fussed because the cops pushed me away, but I'll never push a cop. I'm not that dumb. Mm. And then the top cop says, those protesters object to you being here. I said, I don't care. He said, your presence could incite them to breach the peace.
Oh, yeah.
I said, well, that's on them.
That's for sure.
Public sidewalk, my neighborhood. The cop said, if you don't leave now, I'm arresting you. I said,
on what grounds?
On your presence here is inciting them to breach the peace.
Yeah, that's a crime?
It is not a crime. In fact, I was not charged, but I was handcuffed, frog marched to a police car, searched, put in the back of the police car, driven to jail, searched again, put in a cell.
What was that like?
Well, I knew it was BS. And my friend, my colleague, David Menzies.
Were you mad at the cops?
I was very mad at the cops who arrested me. The ones who obeyed and handcuffed me, I'm not going to be mad at them. They were doing their job. When I was at the jail, the guys in the jail had nothing to do with my arrest. So I was lighthearted, and that's another thing about being in jail I've learned from Tommy Robinson is you are at the mercy of these guards. You're at the physical mercy of them. To me, that's the most terrifying thing about prison, is that they can do whatever they want to you. Mm-hmm. And what are you going to say about it? What are you going to do about it? And
especially if nobody can visit you.
That's right.
Who can communicate.
Exactly right. Mm-hmm. So I knew I would be out in a matter of hours because they didn't actually charge me with anything.
Right. Right. So you weren't worried particularly?
No, because I had been through this 5 times with David Menzies.
Well, right.
Menzies walked up to
Tell everybody who Menzies is.
Rebel News has some colorful characters, and one of my favorites is a guy named David Menzies. He's in his early 60s. He wears a fedora. He's got an old-fashioned style. He loves old pop culture references from the 70s. The guy's a character. Mm-hmm. And he's a shoe leather journalist.
He reported on that trans professor from York who was on the swim team with all the 13-year-old girls and got kicked out of the swimming pool for pointing that out.
You're exactly
right, which he should have pointed out. Yeah, and the parents let him get away with it too. The professor.
You know what?
I mean, what the hell? Seriously.
David, and how many journalists would dare cover that?
Yeah, well, him.
Yeah. David went up to our deputy prime minister at the time, Chrystia Freeland, on a public sidewalk at a public event, and it was about Iran. And the Liberals hadn't banned a certain Iranian terror group. And so David, with his lanyard and mic, everyone knew who he was. He went up to her and said, "Will you ban this group?"
Yeah.
And the RCMP swarmed him, pushed him against the wall and said, "Stop assaulting."
Right.
And they arrested him. If the cameras hadn't been there, look, we all saw that the police assaulted David. They said David assaulted the police.
Yeah.
And they charged him with assault. When they saw that we caught it on tape, they let him go. Mm-hmm. David's been arrested so many times. During the pandemic, David went outside a Christmas party where Justin Trudeau was going to a fundraiser with the Liberal Party. But this was when we weren't supposed to have Christmas parties. It was during the lockdown.
No, you weren't supposed to have Christmas parties.
And that was David's one question. Why are you having a Christmas party when the rest of us are told not to? So David was waiting in the cold on the street with his cameraman for an hour for Trudeau's caravan to arrive.
COVID was genetically engineered not to infect important people,
Mm-hmm. Here's how this story ends. So everyone knows Menzies. He's very visible. He's got his cameraman there. There's no doubt who he is and what his purpose is.
Yeah.
And he's waiting with the Toronto Police Service for an hour. They're bantering. They're all just waiting for the prince to arrive.
Mm-hmm.
Entourage pulls up. They obviously radioed ahead and said, "Who's there?" "Oh, just Menzies." The RCMP bodyguards for Trudeau jump out of the vehicle, go straight to David, and beat the daylights out of him, smash him against the wall, dump him on the ground, beat him, and then let him go. They don't even arrest him. Let alone charge him. They just beat him up. We're suing the police. Our other reporter in Quebec, Alexa Lavoie, the trucker convoy, Rebel News, that was really our time to shine. Mm-hmm. The regime media were all on Justin Trudeau's script. This is the Maple Leaf insurrection. This is the January 6th moment for Canada.
Yeah, it wasn't just for Canada either. Like that demonstration triggered all those farmers' protests in the UK, and it was a big deal.
It was huge. It was the time when people paid attention to Canada in an interested, focused way, but Trudeau tried to have the script being these are violent, racist people, fringe minority with unacceptable views. That was his exact
Confederate
word.
Nazis. Canada's full of Confederate Nazis.
So we were down there just with our citizen journalists, just filming everything on our phones. And in that month, we had 400 million views and impressions, which is more than the average bunch of the CBC state broadcaster. I believe we helped stop the Trudeau narrative from taking root. Anyways, that trucker convoy was completely peaceful, except one thing. There was one shooting. There were probably 10,000 or tens of thousands of people in Ottawa, and there were echo events all across the country. Who was the shooting? Our reporter, Alexa Lavoie, clearly marked as a reporter, holding her cell phone, filming riot police and truckers. One riot cop with the RCMP takes out his riot gun at close range and shoots her in the leg. Her, the only person in the end, and with the wadding and a huge bruise, and you can hear her screams of pain. And by the way, the police don't offer her help afterwards. They shoot her and go. We're suing the RCMP for that as well. We've discovered that weapon is not meant to be shot at a person. Won't surprise you to learn. You shoot it into an area on the ground and it releases tear gas. And you only do that with that weapon if things are very escalated. If there's like a riot underway, if people are storming something, you do not use that weapon preemptively because there's a bunch of people chanting. So it was used inappropriately, both in terms of manner and time. And is it a coincidence? And this is my conspiracy theory side. Is it a coincidence?
About time we got to those.
That the only person in the country who was shot during the convoy was our reporter. Mm-hmm. And we complained to the RCMP. We're suing them, but we also complained to them. You know who the police have an internal complaint system. You know who they assigned it to. You know where the RCMP officer was based who looked into this matter. You're not going to guess, but why don't you guess for fun?
I couldn't tell.
Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
No, I wouldn't have guessed that. I got to tell you.
The RCMP is part of Trudeau's outreach to the Haitian community in Montreal, has RCMP officers stationed in Haiti to teach them how to be cops. You can accept that or not, but that was where the cop who was going to do this investigation of the shooting of Alex Lavoie, our reporter, was based. It's so absurd. And the RCMP...
So what's the status of that investigation?
We're still proceeding. Oh, the investigation?
Yeah, and the court case.
A whitewash.
Yeah, of course.
David Menzies arrested 5 times. Yeah. Alex Lavoie shot. We brought our whole team to Montreal to cover the curfew. I don't know if you remember, but Montreal had a curfew.
Yeah, I know.
I think from 10 p.m. to 5 a.m.
Yeah.
Sick or not, jabbed or not, you couldn't leave your house.
Yeah, I know.
Now, journalists were exempt, as if journalists are some higher class. So we had a reporter who would go out, and the police would hassle him. So then we sent 3, and the police will hassle them. And I said, damn it, we're bringing the whole team. So we brought 17 rebels into town. And I thought, well, I wonder if there's an Airbnb we could all fit in, because that's a lot of hotel rooms. And I found an Airbnb, like a houseboat in the old port of Montreal, where we could all fit. It had room for 24 people.
Summer, winter? When were you there?
This was, I think it was the spring.
Okay.
I want to double check that.
That's okay.
But we were there to do reporting on the streets during the curfew because the cops had been pushing around our people. And we brought a lawyer with us. And we're walking the streets at midnight, and we have a lawyer with us on the ground to engage with French, Montreal French-speaking police, en français, just to flex our muscles. And by the way, the Montreal police had never seen journalists out and about because they're so incurious and so obedient in the regime media that they would never think to report on this absurd curfew. So we had a great night out. We did curfew reporting late at night. And then we all go to our Airbnb houseboat. And then we get up the next morning and there's going to be a protest. Well, wouldn't you know it, but the old port of Montreal just happens to be the staging area for the police for this. So 50 police cars show up and they find out that's where the Rebel News people are. So they seal off our houseboat with yellow police tape and they come on our little houseboat and say, we're searching this place. Well, and I was off the boat at that time, but our youngsters...
Had you flushed the cocaine by then?
Our youngsters know to say, where's your warrant? I'm so proud of our young people. And they all said, get a warrant. And the cops said, you're going to play that way. They sealed off our boat. And for the next 10 hours, they wanted to search every person and every room.
For what?
It's not yet clear. I think they just wanted to...
Yeah, well, of course.
And we said, come back with a warrant. And I don't think they used to being talked to that way.
Yeah.
For 10 hours, they shopped this around Quebec to try and find a judge. And God bless it, they couldn't find a judge to give them a search warrant.
Well, thank God for that. That's an amazing thing in and of itself.
That's the miracle of the story.
That's for sure. Thank God.
Now, we sued them, and they actually settled. They settled because they harassed a bunch of our people. They paid a bunch of our different journalists a certain sum of money. And then they wrote a letter, sort of a grudging, ironic apology, but it basically said, well, we didn't know who you were, and you always had your journalistic rights. And we sued the Montreal police. They paid our people, the people who were roughed up. They arrested Menzies.
Yeah, of course.
And they took him to a crappy
Seems
jail.
like his fate.
Yeah, you know, Menzies, he's stubborn in a good way. And you don't want everyone in the world to be stubborn in a good way, but you want a few. I always like to say he's 1 in a million. Pause. Thank God.
Yeah, right.
It's a joke. Right. He's actually a national treasure. There's only a handful of journalists who are on the street. A lot of journalists just sit at their desk and Google. How about get out into the world? You never know what you're going to see. And that's the rebel style. We love to travel also. We're from Canada. We got a fella in Melbourne, Australia, Abba Yamini. That was a real lockdown center too. So
right.
He recorded
just about as crazy as Montreal and Toronto.
That's right. Yeah. But we travel. For example, every year we go to Davos, Switzerland. That's this town that the World Economic Forum takes over.
Yeah. How would you describe the World Economic Forum for everybody who's watching and listening?
It sounds super boring, doesn't it? World Economic Forum. That sounds like economists studying the world.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
It's not. These are the masters of the universe. I call them the VVIPs.
Yeah.
These are prime ministers, presidents, royalty, pop culture stars.
Yeah, and the question is why? I asked some Davos attendants who were very well positioned, like who the hell Klaus Schwab is. It's like, how in the world did this cartoon dictator of the world character managed to convene all these VVIPs, as you call them? And Klaus Schwab is a convener fundamentally, and he's certainly not elected. He owns it. He's an owner. Yeah, right.
I call it a crypto government. Here's what I mean by it.
Yeah, definitely.
You have members of government, Chrystia Freeland, Mark Carney. These are the two leading contenders for Alberta.
Hear that? That's Chrystia Freeland and Mark Carney, for those of you who are thinking about voting for them. See, a vote for them is definitely a vote for the WEF, and there'll be a lot more about that on this channel soon.
They're both board members of the World Economic Forum. Justin Trudeau was a global young leader.
Yeah.
And Klaus Schwab bragged, and I'm going to say it in his German accent, we have penetrated the cabinet of Canada. And
you sexual metaphor intended.
You've got to do it in that accent because he really is like a Bond supervillain.
That's for sure. It's such a blackly comical reality. Yeah.
But I don't have a problem with rich people meeting to talk.
Yeah, well, they're going to.
But what do they do there? Here's why I call it a crypto government. Number one, a real government has an independent press. Just a scrutinized thing. The World Economic Forum, there's lots of journalists, but they pay to participate. So they'll never be skeptical or accountability journalists. We go, but we are not allowed in. We're kept outside the security perimeter because we ask unvetted questions.
So that's where you're always lurking out there on the street, like an ambush squad.
That's right. And I'll tell you in a minute some of our favorite catches.
Yeah.
Number two, in a real government, there's an opposition, and sometimes they rotate people through. That's a form of a check and balance. In a real government, there's a lobbyist registry. Who is meeting with them?
Technically, it's a fascist organization. And fascism means to bind together, right? And the fascists were big into the idea that, and this is kind of what defines fascism, that media, corporations, government should all be working together as a unit to push forward whatever the interest happens to be, whatever the agenda happens to be. And the WEF is a place where exactly that happens, is that the elites of all the different power hierarchies meet and, conspire morally to improve the planet, despite the fact that they have no democratic standing. And as you said, no opposition and no journalistic coverage, and that it's a pay-to-play arrangement that's made Schwab and his cronies exceptionally rich. And that's really demented and twisted the world in unbelievably pathological ways. Net zero, that's a WF initiative. ESG, right? That stakeholder capitalism, that's all pouring out of the WEF. That's the sort of thing, by the way, that Carney supports in spades. He's an architect of those policies and a distributor of them all around the world. Carney believes that 85% of the world's fossil fuels have to remain in the ground, and that somehow magically Alberta in particular is going to have even better jobs under this new green economy that he can't define, that's going to apparently run on hydrogen of all bloody things, all the pathological idiocies you can possibly imagine. So he's like Trudeau on steroids. And so, that's the WEF, man, in a nutshell. Every stupid idea you can possibly imagine the last 15 years is being promoted by the Davos crowd, all to virtue signal because they're guilty about being, guilty about being rapacious billionaires, I suppose. They could work a little on the rapaciousness and a little less on the virtue signaling. So anyways, okay, so you're in the WEF and you're out there trying to, what? What are you doing?
Well, we're outside the moat. I mean, it's a very high security place. It's hard to get there. They buy up every hotel room in town. So we stay one town over and take the train.
Right, so it's isolated to protect.
That's right. And so we had to fly to Zurich, take 3 trains up. and we're not allowed in. So we're just on the cold streets.
Where do you stay?
We stay one town over called Closters. We in an Airbnb typically, and they quintuple the prices that week.
Of course.
That week, the local airport, the private jet airport, they say that they make their whole year's money in that 1 week.
Yeah.
And if you go and watch the private jets,
and think of all the lovely carbon that's being produced.
Private
Feeding all
jets,
the plants.
they come in, and it's such a small airport that they drop off the VVIPs, but then the planes have to go fly to another airport to park. And then they come and fly, like, it's an extra flight just to park the plane. I've never seen anything more carbon intensive. And then there's helicopters.
It's probably got slightly greener around Davos.
That's right, because of all the CO2.
Yeah.
You know, they're against fuel and they're against food, even though
No. They're against fuel and food for peasants.
And that's so they're in their private jets, but you have to take public transit. I was in the streets of Davos 2 weeks ago, and I see a guy handing out energy bars. Like, there's a lot of kiosks and people giving away grab bags and goodies, and it's cold, so they give away hot chocolate and tea. So one guy's giving away energy bars, and people are flocking to it. But I notice on some box he has, it says insect protein.
Oh, yeah.
So I said, who are you? What are you? And he actually talked to me for 15 minutes. His company's called Pumbaa. And if you know your Disney movies, there's a character that eats insects called Pumbaa.
Right.
But on this candy bar, it does not say the word insect anywhere. In the ingredients, in tiny print, it uses the Latin genus and species for the mealworm.
Oh, yeah.
It's ground up. It's like Adolphinus diaperinus or something.
Sounds delicious.
I don't think 1 in 1,000 people, 1 in 100,000 people knows what that is. And he was giving them away, and he was saying there's insect protein in it, but no one heard him. I was there with my camera, and I said, did you hear him? He said there's insect protein in it. And some people were repulsed by it. Others didn't care. They are doing creepy and weird things.
Bugs are the right thing to do creepy things with.
If you want to eat bugs, I'm not going to say don't. But don't sell it or give it away and hide it. There's a lot of strange things going on in the World Economic Forum. And I feel like
you need a T-shirt that says that. A lot of strange things going on in the World Economic Forum. Rebel News.
Rebel News were sort of scruffy. And I mean, I say the drawbridge comes down and these princes walk out onto the town, and we're there. These grubby peasants asking them questions.
Out of the gutter.
2 years ago, I think it was, we scrummed Albert Bourla, the CEO of Pfizer. This year, we scrummed Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock.
They're fun.
And we had a lot of questions. We asked 70 questions. I later counted. We walked and talked with Larry Fink for 9 minutes, and we asked 70 questions. He answered 0. In fact, his bodyguard sort of pushed us a bit, and then Fink took out his cell phone, put it right in our face, click. I said, you intimidating me? I'll tell you my name. I'm going to make, it was so weird.
Well, you haven't been on social media much, Ezra.
But, and Albert Bourla, we were asking real questions. Yeah, we were annoying. I'll grant you that.
Yeah.
But like my first question to Larry Fink is, have you spoken to the president yet? Are you moving away from ESG?
Yeah.
And are you going to come to his way of thinking like Zuckerberg did? I really am curious, because Larry Fink is a real...
Yeah, because Vanguard has moved away from ESG to some...
So it was a real question.
Yeah.
And then I asked a bunch of questions. I said, are you putting your ideology above shareholder returns? Like if you're making investments,
the definition of ESG.
Yeah. And that's a real question. And maybe I was fairly polite. I said, Mr. Fink, etc. Why would he walk with us for 9 minutes, but not deign to give us an answer? And Albert Bourla, the same thing. We said, when did you know that the vaccine, didn't actually block transmission? You said it was 100% effective, then 90, 80, 70. So when did you know? I asked him real questions, and my colleague Avi Yamini did too. The fact that we were on the street and not vetted disgusted these men. Both of them had probably done 10 interviews that day, but the interviews were with trusted partners who had actually paid to attend the World Economic Forum. The idea that they would be in an unscripted moment and owe an answer to anyone was beneath them. That contempt, if you ask me what is the World Economic Forum, that's what it is. It's these masters of the universe who like to hang out with other masters of the universe and who have contempt to talk about humanity, but they actually hate people. That's the, and I've been going for 4 years, and you never know what you're going to get there.
Yeah, I'm very afraid that that's exactly the sort of attitude that characterizes Mr. Carney. And I'm more convinced about that after reading his book quite carefully, Values. It's like, yeah, he likes humanity, but, you know, food, shelter, clothing, and heat or air conditioning for you or your car. You know, do you get to have a car under Mark Carney? Yeah. You know, the globalist utopian types, they'd like to see a 95% reduction in private car ownership. Right?
This is the place that came out with the think piece. You'll own nothing and you'll be happy.
Yeah. Or else you'll bloody well be happy, or at least you won't get to complain. Yeah. You'll own nothing and you won't get to complain.
But let me say one thing. I've just spent 10 minutes criticizing the World Economic Forum, but I'll say this, and it's probably a compliment of Switzerland more than the World Economic Forum. There are hundreds of very well-armed police and military in Davos with big firearms.
Yeah.
It feels extremely safe, by the way. They have never once tried to stop us from scrumming these VVIPs. As long as you don't touch them, not that I would ever touch anyone.
Yeah.
John Kerry, the former Secretary of State and climate ambassador, he walks around all the time, and he actually talks to us while we walk. It's very interesting. And like all these VVIPs, Larry Fink had two sort of tough guys with him that pushed us a bit. But as long as you don't touch the VVIP, you can scrum them. The cops don't care. In fact, I think the cops get a kick out of it.
You'd think the cops in Canada would get a kick out of it too, really?
Well,
because
they've been politicized by their mayors and police commissions and all the way down. The police in Canada are becoming more political every day. They would, in Switzerland, they would never do what they did to me or to Menzies or to Alexa Lavoie, never do that houseboat raid. They actually are gentle police with a light touch there.
Yeah, well, it's a terrible thing to think of that harder-handed, politicized police presence being part and parcel of Canada. That's really not a good thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think you guys, you know, love you or hate you, or maybe a bit of both. You guys have been canaries in the coal mine for Canada for a long time. And also not just Canada, right? Because how much of your viewership is international?
You know, I'd say 60% is Canadian, and then US and the UK after that, and then Australia. But,
right, so 40% international. Is that primarily the U.S. or
the U.S.
Yeah.
And then
well, it's such a big population
That's
center.
right. And then the U.K., especially when we covered Tommy, because the domestic media in the U.K., they're uniformly against him, which is strange because
it is strange.
So many ordinary Brits really follow Tommy.
Yeah. How many people do you think were at that last rally? That was, 2 weeks ago? Maybe something like that. It's February 9th today, and so it would have been about 2 weeks ago. And that was a free Tommy Robinson rally, right?
That's right.
And I couldn't get any reasonable estimate of the number of people that showed up, and it was peaceful again. There's been a bunch of rallies that Robinson has been involved in or at the core of that have been, like the trucker convoy, markedly peaceful, right? And that's very weird because you'd also expect them to be sewed with agents provocateur who are there to cause trouble, to discredit the organization. But even given that, those rallies have been peaceful. And you can see in the UK that the working class, the genuine working class, like the actual inhabitants of Britain, are not happy and hold viewpoints that aren't well represented by the standard political parties, and certainly not by the media. Yeah.
You know that the city of Rotherham.
Yeah.
Depends on how you measure the size of the city and the county. It's about 100,000 souls there. So about 50,000 are women. Take out the children and the old people. I don't know, is it 25,000 women of a certain age? 1,400 of them were raped by rape gangs. And when I say raped, I don't mean raped once.
Right.
I mean every night for months or years by multiple men.
Yeah.
But these were working class British girls.
Yeah, they don't count.
And the rapists, over 80% of them were British, Pakistani Muslim men. So you had the perfect storm. You had girls who were nobody's nothing. Oh, what are they? Nothing.
Slags.
And then you had perpetrators. Oh, we don't dare mention them.
Yeah.
And so this went on for years, for decades even.
Yeah. I know it's one of those crimes that has, look.
And that's just
I always think of my mother when I'm having a conversation like this. I took my mom to Australia and I traveled with her and her sister, and they're conventional Canadians, and they were accustomed to believing CTV, believing Lloyd Robertson, believing the CBC. And, you know, for a long time, that wasn't completely unreasonable, right? The legacy media in Canada, like most Canadian institutions, was pretty damn solid, centrist, pretty reliable. And then it wasn't. And that started probably 15 years ago, maybe something like that. But when you guys, you know, popped your head above the turret. And you imagine someone like her or her sister, these conventional, hardworking, middle class or working class Canadians who are accustomed to trusting their institutions. And then all of a sudden, all of that goes sideways. And they're asked to believe things like what we're talking about. You know, they're asked to believe that the food pyramid's a scam and that the school systems were set up by fascists and that the WF is a global conspiracy of crypto-fascists who want to take everybody's vehicles, and that there are gangs operating at a scale in the UK that involve maybe 1 million girls. No one knows, right? No one knows. Yeah. And even that's like, is it 10,000? Yeah. Is it 100,000? Yeah. Is it 1 million? Oh, we don't know. Well, maybe you should look into it. Well, if you're in the shoes of a person like that, you either have to believe that everything that you thought was true in your life is flipped upside down, or that you're being scammed by conspiracy theorists. Well, of course you're going to believe the latter, because why the hell wouldn't you? Yeah. You know, and you have to kind of be dragged. Even Michael Schellenberger, you know, he broke the W-Path story, right? That's that preposterous group of perverted psychopaths who purport to be experts in psychopathology and have defined the standards of care for gender-affirming butchery conducted on minors. That's W-Path, run by Marcy Bowers. I think it's Bowers or Bows, who's a transsexual surgeon who was involved in the Jazz Jennings case, which they made a reality TV show out of. Yeah, that W-Path. Well, Schellenberg told me when I interviewed him that I'd interviewed was it Helen Joyce or Abigail Schreier? I talked to both of them, who were early investigators into the gender-affirming scandal. He said when he first heard the interview, he couldn't believe it was true. Yeah. And that's Schellenberger, yeah. You know, and he was a lefty back in the day and clued in and woke up, and he's a hell of a investigative journalist. But even Schellenberger couldn't believe it. And there's like 50 things that are happening that you can't believe. Yeah. And that's, you know, one of the things that you guys have done in Rebel News is like you've been on the forefront of cracking these preposterous stories. And then, you know, you're arrested for your trouble in Canada. It's so preposterous. It's like, how the hell did Canada become a place where, well, first of all, muckraking journalists are necessary, and they certainly are. That bloody CBC, right? It's $1.5 billion a year plus $600 million in advertising from the federal government to have no audience. They have no audience, right? Except people over 60. And they've been struggling to get a purchase on YouTube for like 10 years. They've disallowed comments because that's how clueless they are. And no one watches their material. Like they literally get hundreds of views. Yeah. Which means that even the staff that made the shows don't watch them, right? And so here we are in Canada, and Mark Carney's come along to save the Canada, but really to save the planet. And Canadians are daft enough to start. You can see the scales tilting in his favor. You know, I mean, we were going to decimate the Liberals because Trudeau's been such an absolute bloody nightmare catastrophe in his narcissistic and incompetent manner. And now Carney's coming waltzing in from the Bank of England with his ESG and his DEI and his net zero and his you don't need fossil fuels, peasants or cars. And Canadians are lining up to vote for him. Jesus.
I saw an opinion poll about Trump's idea, his social media banter about Canada becoming the 51st state.
Yeah.
Now, I think he just likes poking at Trudeau. Trump is a master of the insulting nickname. Like, he's just got that
Manhattan. Yeah, he sure is. Yeah, he's definitely got, that's an art.
He's an entertainer, and he's a quick-thinking, mischievous fellow.
Yeah.
So he met with Trudeau at Mar-a-Lago, and he detected certain...
He didn't let him stay there that night.
No, and he poked at him a bit.
Yeah.
The thing is, 10 years ago, you would have said to Canadians who want to join the States, I think Canadians would say... No, first of all, we're wealthier. There was a point in time when the average Canadian, on an individual basis, was wealthier than...
Yeah, well, we've dispensed with that. It's 60% now.
There were a lot of things that the Canadians would say, you know, we really like America, but boy, we're glad.
We're good.
But what's happened over the last 10 years on everything, forget tangible things like money, mass immigration, crime. What about intangibles? What about a prime minister who took John A. Macdonald off our $10 bill, who says the country
has no national identity, but insults Daniel Smith for not being patriotic enough to sacrifice the Alberta economy to Canada, a Canada that's a patriarchal, oppressive, you know, what would you say, post-colonial identityless state.
And he said those things in an interview with a foreign newspaper nonetheless. It was the New York Times. But not just that, Trudeau says we're a genocidal country. And the genocide continues. He says we're sexist, transphobic. He, in so many ways, he makes grand apologies all the time, but not for himself, for the country. So you've had almost 10 years of him degrading and demoralizing and denaturing, cutting people off from our roots and our history and our culture and identity.
And destroying the economy at the same time.
So if you're a young man, and you want to buy a home and start a life and get a job, all of those things, a lot of young people live with their parents till well into their 30s, not because they're failure to launch. You can't buy a home in Canada. It's twice as much in the States.
No, we don't have much land, you know.
But all of a sudden, when Trump says, would you like to join the U.S.? We'll trade in your dollars at par. There'll be no tariffs and you'll have a strong military. You know what? You're a young man. And for 10 years, you've been told by Trudeau that your country means nothing. It's just a hotel.
Worse than nothing.
And here's this strong, masculine guy who's commanding authority, and he truly is making America great again. And when he says that, it's plausible. And when he says
he's got these monsters like Musk on his side who are tromping through the grapevine.
And the world is bending the knee to him, whether it's the Japanese prime minister or a Korean investor or whatever.
And he just made a deal with the Japanese prime minister.
$1 trillion deal.
For a deal where Trudeau had, because the Japanese prime minister had come to Canada and Trudeau said, we can't make a business case for that. So
is it surprised that young men of all the demographics say, you know what, I'll take Trump up on that deal? I forget I think it was 43%. I think 43% of young men, I'm going from memory here, said, yeah, we'll take that deal. And that's without a campaign. That's just based on a few tweets.
Casual.
And Instagram. And there's many things to love about America. I mean, there's an amazing number of things to love about America. But imagine abandoning your history, your culture, your tradition, your borders, your institutions. That's how Trudeau has eroded in the country. And I don't blame Trump for finding that weakness and shaking it. That's what you do when you're America first. You get, and when you're negotiating.
And I don't think Canada's learned a damn thing from it yet. I mean, the Quebec premier came out this week and basically said there was no damn way they were going to put pipelines across the country. Right? You can't make an economic or a global case for that. It's like, hey, you know, have it your way, buddy. Where do you think your transfer payments are going to come from if Alberta decides to pack up and leave?
I think that Mark Carney's ideas are 10 years too late. 10 years ago, carbon taxes, ESG, wokeism. And he made a little statement the other day saying he's for wokeism. In his mind, that means inclusiveness. That's not what woke means one bit.
So he knows exactly what it means to the degree that he knows what anything means.
He absolutely is the World Economic Forum candidate.
Absolutely.
But I think that
and a leader rather than a follower, because Trudeau was a follower. Carney's a leader.
Carney is smart, and Carney is a doer. Like, you don't get those chairman of Brookfield, the
governor of the Bank of Canada
and Bank of England.
And he looks to Canadians, you know, and you can understand this. Carney looks like someone with vast international experience and credibility.
Gravitas. He looks the part.
He certainly does. Well, Trudeau looked a certain part to it quite effectively. But this is different. Carney has that senior statesman appeal, but values that, I mean, and then for Carney to announce his leadership as an outsider, it's like that icy. So you're going to start off
on an
with
American
a preposterous
TV channel.
Lie. Hey, I mean, I'm an outsider.
I can't imagine any American candidate for president announcing their candidacy on a foreign network. Could you imagine Trump or Kamala Harris announcing they're running for the president of the United States on the BBC? But absurdly, Mark Carney announced his candidacy in New York City. I think if Carney takes over, he's going to win on March 9th. And then he's going to do a deal with the NDP, and he will become prime minister till October without ever having won an election.
I think they'll stretch it out till September of 2026 because there is some grounds for presuming they could do so. Well, look, what's the alternative? You know, at the moment, unless things invert in the polls, if Carney led the Liberals to an election, they're going to get decimated. So why would you do that?
I'm also worried about foreign meddling. Carney is deep with China. communist China, and that's been a problem in Canada. There was the various CSIS, that's Canada's spy agency, saying that the Chinese Communist Party interfered in at least 11 electoral districts. Trudeau turned a blind eye to it because he was the beneficiary of that. In fact, communist donors would come and make donations directly to the Trudeau Foundation. I'm worried about ties to China, and I'm worried about ties to Iran. And I just don't think that Canada is going to survive as a first-ranked nation if the Liberals aren't turfed this year.
Are we a first-ranked nation now?
We're clinging on by our fingernails.
The only reason we're still a first-ranked nation is because Europe has done itself in at about the same rate Canada has.
And we're lucky that we're right next to America. Not only do we benefit economically, but a lot of their cultural discussions wash over into us. And I mean, look what Trump has done on transgenderism in sports. He's just ended with a stroke of a pen.
Gender-affirming care, too.
Even small things like saying we're done with paper straws. I mean, I know that sounds small, but show me someone who's ever liked that. And yes,
I like the paper straws that come in plastic, the single-use paper straws that come in plastic wrappers. I'm very fond of those.
But what does it say about a country that abides that stupid rule that no one likes, but we just abided it? We just accepted it. What does it say about the nature and of the character of 40 million Canadians?
It says that we're willing to virtue signal at our own expense.
And we saw that during the pandemic and the lockdowns when things went so hard in Canada.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And it was an opportunity for people to, I'll show my righteousness by being a voluntary, self-appointed enforcer. The phenomenon that
people enjoyed that, man, Toronto was rife with informers. It was something to see. I certainly understand.
The mask patrols who would come up to you and give you, and here's the thing, and I know the pandemic's gone now, but this said something about our character. If
we could have another one.
If you actually were worried about the virus, and you saw someone without a mask, you would walk away, you would run away, you would take your children and run. If someone with Ebola came into the mall without a mask, you wouldn't go up to them and say, hey, put on your mask.
You would if you were sacrificing yourself for the good of the planet.
Right. But there was an opportunity to be more virtuous than that person. But more to the point, I think this is what, I watched so many of those videos, and I myself was a bit of a mask not wearing, a dissident. So I had a lot of encounters, and it wasn't even virtue signaling. It was, I'm worried that if I didn't wear a mask, the rules would come down on me. There would be some consequence on me. So if you're not wearing a mask and no consequences are happening to you, the world is out of joint. And I made the wrong decision.
You're an indication of my cowardice.
I must fill the gap and be the consequence to you to justify my cowardice. So it's not so much that I'm better than you. It's, oh my God, you're getting away with it, and I didn't think I could. I better stop you from getting away with it, because otherwise, what's my excuse for being so submissive?
Little bit of column A. Well, and then there's the ever-present enjoyment in getting to rat on your neighbors, and we never want to underestimate just how pleasurable that can be. So I think 70% of people in Toronto would have worn a mask for the rest of their life if they could have continued to inform on their neighbors.
I got to tell you one last story. I know time is of the essence. Do you know what the Amish are? Have you heard of the Amish?
Oh, yeah.
They're Christian from Europe. They speak German amongst themselves.
They're like the Mennonites in Alberta.
Yeah. They're very old-fashioned. They don't use modern technology at all. They don't drive. They don't have electricity. They don't have smartphones. They're farmers, very poor, and they keep to themselves, and they're pacifists. That's another thing to know about them. They do not want to engage in any disobedience. They keep to themselves. They're reclusive. There's a lot of them in Pennsylvania, and there's a lot of them in Ontario. We heard about this from a friend of the Amish, that the Amish used to go back and forth between Ontario and the U.S. to visit the other colonies down there for dates, for family events. So every time the Amish would come back across the border into Canada during the pandemic, there was a border officer who would say, have you downloaded the ArriveCan app on your smartphone?
Right.
Now, for your American viewers, they don't know what ArriveCan is. It's a mandatory app, sort of spyware, that you have to give all your health details, all your vax details. You have to put it in this app on your phone, or you get a $6,000 fine. So the Amish, they don't know what download or app. They know what a smartphone is. They just don't have them. ArriveCan. So they would go, every time they would come back to Canada, every single person, including children, would get a $6,000 fine.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. hundreds of thousands of dollars, but they're not on the internet. They're not on phones or faxes. They're really cut off. So years go by, and an Amish goes to the bank to get a loan for some livestock and pledges the farm as the security. And the banker types in and says, "I'm sorry, I can't give you the loan. There's a lien against your farm."
Oh, yeah.
And then another Amish passes away, wants to bequeath the farm to his son. Can't. There's a lien on it. You got to sell the farm to pay the lien.
Yeah.
Soon the whole community does this. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in tickets. Now, it was a miracle we found out about this because they don't know what Rebel News is. They don't follow the internet or watch TV. A friendly non-Amish neighbor heard them talking about this and heard it. So we helped. There's a charity called the Democracy Fund. I know you've spoken at one of the events before. The Democracy Fund has dispatched lawyers to help the Amish and to crack open these cases again and redo them. And basically, these were trials in absentia. The Amish were not there. And we're having some success at it's hard to crack open a case once it's guilty. And,
Oh, yeah.
But just stop for 1 second. The Amish, they're not hidden. They wear the black hats and they're unique. They almost look like Orthodox Jews in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And in Canada, they go on horse and carriage.
Yeah.
You know an Amish when you see it.
Definitely.
And you can probably detect that they're not smartphone friendly.
Yeah.
How many people in the Canadian bureaucracy would have been involved from that first border agent to his manager, to the court, to the prosecutor, to the judge, and then to convict? But I have never heard of a lien being liens on all their farms.
Well, that's what would happen if you didn't pay the tickets.
I haven't met anyone else in the country who has had that happen.
Oh, I see. Okay.
For an ArriveCan app, yes, that is the ultimate way that the government gets their money. I've just never heard of that in the country. How many people were involved from that first?
Wasn't that the same ArriveCan app that the Liberals paid $45 million for, and
Indeed
that some
was.
team of hackers built over a weekend for $350?
Indeed, it was.
Yeah, that ArriveCan app.
But not one person. There must have been 100 people involved. Not one person said,
"What the hell are we doing?
What are we doing?" Not one person.
Yeah.
Not one person. Now, I'm not saying that's Canada only. I bet stupid things happen in America too. In fact, the Amish were persecuted in America. That's why they became politicized under the Biden administration. They started cracking down on raw milk.
Yeah.
And I think that the Amish realized their way of life was in jeopardy. And so a very un-Amish thing to do was they became political. And you probably saw the footage also of these horses and carriages with the Trump flags.
Yeah.
I've never seen an Amish do that before. They must have thought this is do or die time. That's one of the reasons why Trump carried Pennsylvania, is because the Biden administration was an existential threat to the Amish way of life, including no connection to the government, just natural living. Very, very interesting, the contrast between America, but the Amish in Canada, they're being helped by the Democracy Fund now, so I'm pleased.
So let's close with just a bit more about Rebel News in general, and then we'll go to the Daily Wire side. I think I'll talk to you on the Daily Wire side about the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, because I know you went to our first conference, and so we'll chat about that. We can talk a little bit more about the Trump administration and what Elon Musk is finding and USAID. And so if you want to join us on the Daily Wire side for that, please you feel welcome to do that. The Daily Wire makes all these podcasts possible and, follows me all around the world. I'm in Winnipeg today. I was in Florida yesterday and Washington before that. They set up the camera crews and everything wherever I go. It's extremely useful and handy and make all these YouTube videos possible. And so, we do an extra half an hour on the Daily Wire side, and that's for subscribers only. But if you're inclined to follow, all my material from the last 15 years, including a bunch of specials I did too for the Daily Wire, Western Civilization, specials on marriage and vision and success, and on Exodus and the Gospels, that's all available there as well. So, give it a shot if you're inclined. Ezra, why don't you let people know where they can follow Rebel News? Like, what's the best place to watch you, or the multiple places to watch you and your intrepid, troublemaking, rabble-rousing reporters?
Sure. rebelnews.com is our homepage, and some of our talent are on Twitter. You can follow us on Twitter also. It's just Rebel News Online. And we're mainly operating in Canada. We have Avi Yamini based in Melbourne, Australia, but we love to travel. to World Economic Forum, to when there was a big freedom of speech rally in Sao Paulo, Brazil, when the Brazilian government banned the entire Twitter app for everybody. We went down there. I've never been in a crowd of 100,000 people, or maybe it was 200,000 people. It was astonishing. And they actually were rallying for freedom of speech. I'm so glad we went. So that's the kind of kamikaze flight to Sao Paulo for one day to go to a rally and come back. We just went to Maui, not for a vacation.
Sure, Ezra. That's what Trudeau says too. You know?
How's the wildfire reconstruction going? I want to know, because I got some friends in L.A. who want a premonition of what's to come. It's been 18 months since the wildfires destroyed the town of Lahaina. 95% of the lots have not had a brick of reconstruction. They're just covered with gravel. But FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, has set up camps of tiny homes. A year and a half into it, and there's all sorts of schemes to take the land and do other things with it. Low-income housing, environmental housing.
The same thing's going to happen in L.A.
And obviously, it's heartbreaking. A year and a half later, So, I mean, Maui's a beautiful place. That city is a heartbreaking place. And over 100 people died in that fire, too, and there was politics in that. So Rebel News, we love covering Canada. We love covering Trump. We have a reporter in the United Kingdom now, Sammy Woodhouse. She was one of those 1,400 girls in Rotherham. She was the whistleblower. She was the one who rang the bell. She was the one who broke the silence and went to the newspapers. Sammy Woodhouse, moral authority, resilient. She's our new reporter in the UK. So Rebel News is here and there, but we also travel to find the news where we see it. Let me give you an anecdote. I went to the town of Dundrum, Ireland. I know you haven't heard of it because it's less than 200 people there. It's like a picture book. It's so beautiful. And then the Irish government contracts with the local hotel to take over all the rooms and moves in 240 military-aged migrant men. And in one fell swoop, Dundrum is now a minority Irish village. Just what is going on over there? And Rebel News.
In Ireland?
In Ireland.
There's a crazy country for you. Man, if you want a country on the forefront of every woke nightmare you can possibly imagine, you'd be hard-pressed to find a better example than Ireland.
I mean, they resisted the British for centuries. They resisted domination, but they're welcoming it now. I don't understand it. They never colonized anyone. They don't have some repentance to do. They don't have to pay reparations to anyone. They're the ones. Why are they doing this? I don't know. It's astonishing. I'm glad I visited Ireland while it was still Irish. And I would say to anyone out there, go visit that beautiful country while it's still Irish.
Well, we've got another half an hour to do for the Daily Wire. Good to see you, man.
Thank you very
Thanks
much.
for coming to talk to me in Winnipeg. And to everybody watching and listening, thank you very much for your time and attention.